Hello everyone and welcome back to Make the Music, and today we've got a very exciting video. It's Mixing 101 and we're going to be going over EQ. What EQ is, what are the different types of plugins that utilize equalization, and then how to use them on some example tracks. Those are the three things we're going to go over here. I have a guide called the Home Studio Toolbox. It's a guide that walks you through everything you need to start recording music in your home studio in terms of DAWs, virtual instruments, plugins you can use. And the best part is everything in that guide is 100% free, so you can get started right now. Find that guide in the description box and tell us where to send it. Anyways, we're going to start deep diving into EQ. So if you have no idea what any of these terms are in mixing, well, you've come to the right place. I'm going to break it down here. We're going to go over a few different kinds of instruments that it's going to become clear what EQ can be used for. And then maybe later we'll go over some more the more advanced purposes of EQ. But let's start diving into this. So I have this track here. You guys maybe have heard it before on the channel. I'll play it real quick. Okay, so that is my track. And what mixing engineers do and what we use in our home studios is an effect or an insert called equalization. And all equalization is changing the response or the frequency response of your track or your audio that you're playing back. Think of your car stereo for a second here. Most people have a car stereo and you have some minimal controls, low, mid, and high, right? And you kind of understand that if you turn up the lows, you're getting more of that low frequency response. You turn up the mid range, it's bringing up the mids, right, between the highs and the lows. And the highs are those real crispy frequencies. That makes things more clear, so to speak, right? And so that's what you're doing in your car stereo. It's a very similar thing in our mixing situation, right? We're doing a very similar thing. We just have more detail. We have what are called more bands, and bands are just points of insert that allow us to change the frequency response of a specific instrument. And there's a couple different ways we can apply that. So the two main ways that equalization comes in plugin form, this is a graphical EQ, right? Because this is showing a graph. We have the amount of dB change of that frequency, and then the frequency that's being changed, right? There's an x-axis here and a y-axis here. So that's graphical equalization. Then there's parametric equalization, and that comes in the form of what's usually a channel strip plugin. Because on mixing consoles, if you've ever seen classic mixing consoles that were built 30, 40 years ago, they had what was called a channel strip, and their equalization looked like this. So unlike the graph, it's going to have a frequency with these buttons here. In real life, you would use your hands to twist the knobs, right? But we use a mouse, of course, in the home studio situation. So this is selecting a frequency. This allows you to change how much of that frequency is in the sound. And then this allows you to modify how the type of change that will be, whether it'll be a broad change or a narrow change. And so that's what parametric EQ is doing. Graphical EQing is doing a similar thing, just in a different way, right? So we can use either of these to use EQ on our tracks. One is not inherently better than the other. Some people prefer one version over the other for different reasons, and that's fine. But most DAWs have a stock graphical EQ that comes with it, whether you're using Pro Tools, Logic. I'm using Reaper, right? This is a Reaper stock EQ plugin. No matter which DAW you're using, it comes with a stock EQ like this. So this is an easy way for me to show you how to make this work, but I'll also explain how parametric EQ works. So if you're getting into using different kinds of plugins and you want to understand how some of these facets work, I'll get into that as well. So this is a graphical EQ, okay? And what are we looking at here, right? So if I play the sound, this graphical EQ is on the snare drum, right? So if I play this track here, so you can see on the graph the frequency response of that track. You can see how much there is of these different hertz values. And so down here, you can see this is 50 hertz, 100, 200, and then exponentially, this increases here until we get to 20K, so 20,000 hertz or cycles as it's called. So I'm not going to go into exactly all the physics of sound, but you just need to understand that 50 hertz, 100 hertz, these are more the low frequencies. As we start to get to close to 700 to 3 to 4K, that's more of the mid-range frequencies. And then 5, 6, 7K and up is usually considered the high frequencies, right? And what this EQ allows us to do is change how much of each of those frequencies are in the sound that we're monitoring. So if I hit play again, you can see the EQ curve, right? You can see where there's a lot of that frequency, there's a lot of 300, there was less of the 2 or 3K, and then there was a bit of a bump here, right? So you can see that. Now, just seeing is not what's going to help us mixing, right? We need to use our ears, of course, when we're thinking about equalization, but these plugins allow us to then modify the sound and change what amount of each frequency is in the sound. And what this allows us to do is remove frequencies that don't sound good, don't allow the track to poke through in the mix, and add frequencies that make the track sound better, more exciting, and pokes through better in the mix, adds more clarity, right? And so that is our goal when using equalization. You're not trying to necessarily just straight up hype the sound. You're trying to make the sound much clearer in this track environment. And so I'm going to play the snare drum again here. And now a lot of the times too, I will EQ not with the track in solo, but with the entire thing in context. But I'm doing this for educational purposes. And I just want you to hear what is going on. So with me hearing the snare drum, just with my trained ear, I know exactly what do I want to do to get this to cut through more. And so here's a general rule of thumb when mixing some of these tracks like snare drum. This is not for every snare drum, okay? Every snare drum is going to be different, okay? But this is just sort of my thought process when using EQ. That's another thing when it comes to mixing. There's no hard rules of thumb, right? You always boost this frequency or you always reduce this frequency. There's no really rules like that because I don't know what your track sounds like, right? It's all about what it needs to sound like in context of the mix. So there's a couple different ways we can modify the track with a graphical EQ. One, and probably the most useful one, is something called a high pass filter. And what a high pass filter does is exactly what the name suggests. It allows all the high frequencies to pass through, to not get filtered out. When we filter something out, we're removing it from the track. So if I right click on this band, that's what these are called here, right click and I go high pass, see band type high pass here. See how it has this curve now. This is showing me all the frequencies that have been removed from the sound. And most high pass filters, they filter out at a certain curve. It's not just directly everything under 200 hertz, right? It's showing that basically everything under 50 absolutely got cycled out. And then on a certain geometric curve, everything under 100 hertz and then a little bit above 100 hertz gets filtered out. That's the most musical sounding way to do this. You can move this band so that you can high pass up to any frequency. You could get rid of everything, right? So if I play the snare drum, the more I move that high pass filter up, the more low frequencies and then eventually mid frequencies got filtered out of the sound, and the sound got thinner and thinner, right? Because we removed the lows and the mids. Another kind of band here, this is a standard band, is where we can straight up just boost or remove frequencies in the instrument. So if I play it again, okay, so from just me doing that, you can get an idea at what these different bands can do. And it's going to take some experimenting in you in your home studio to figure out what frequencies sound like where and what frequencies sound good in an instrument or need to be removed from an instrument. The last thing you can do is change what is called the Q, or the bandwidth of this boost here. So this is a standard band. And for me, it's the mouse wheel. I can either make the boost much more narrow or much more broader or wider. So you can see that there. So for example, if I wanted to boost 1K on my snare drum, that's the frequency 1000 hertz, and I boost it up like this, I can make it a very narrow boost or very broad using my mouse wheel. And so that's boosting a lot of frequencies there, right? Typically, when EQing any sort of instrument, you want to be broader with your boosts and more narrow with your cuts. And so not only can you add frequencies, right, we can remove frequencies. And so you notice that when I boosted it and made it much more narrow like this, it started to sound kind of weird, right? It didn't sound very natural. So what we'd like to do is boost broader with boosts, right? But when we remove a frequency, let's say this is a frequency or sound you don't like in the snare drum, we would go narrow and take that out of the instrument, right? So that is the basic function of a graphical EQ here. Now this is a parametric EQ. Similar principles apply, we're just not looking at things on a graph, right? We have to rely on our ears a lot more. And so I'm generally okay with beginners using graphical EQs to try and understand what is going on, seeing the frequency response curve, being able to experiment a little bit. But as I've gotten more advanced, I've learned to use parametric EQs more because It teaches you to rely on your ears more, but you need to be a little more advanced to be able to use them. There are similar functions with this parametric EQ. For example, by turning this clockwise here, we can boost the frequency. That'd be a 15 dB boost there. Just like on the graphical EQ, when I moved the band up, it showed me that was a 7.5 dB boost there, right? It's a very similar thing. We select the frequency that we want to boost and or cut with this knob over here, turning it clockwise or counterclockwise. This is 8K, right? Going all the way up to 16K or down to 1.5K. And on it goes. We've got about 3 bands here. We also can add a specific low frequency here. And typically on most parametric EQs over here on the left, they have a high pass filter and a low pass filter. So you can not only high pass, which I showed you guys before, you can also low pass frequencies as well. Probably used less than the high pass filter, but still will come into play sometimes with these instruments. So with the snare drum again, just listen as I boost some of these frequencies. So you can hear the effect of all those different knobs there, right? So using those, that's our EQ, right? That's how we're able to change how the instrument sounds in the entire mix. So let's take this snare drum here. I'm gonna improve this snare drum. Let's listen to the chorus here. So just to me, the snare drum sounds muffled. I can't really hear it that well, and I'd like to hear more high frequencies so it could cut through the mix. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm not going to high pass here on this band. I'm just going to change this back to regular. I'm going to high pass to about 50 or 70 hertz. I don't need that much ultra sub harmonic information in the snare. And what I'm going to do is look for some frequencies to boost to get it to cut through more. There's no saying what this world can bring. And every time I close my eyes, I see a new reality. There's no saying what. Okay, I really like that boost that I did there. I felt like that helped the snare drum cut more. Let me bypass this plugin here. There's no saying what this world can bring. Okay, so I can hear it a lot better. Now, one thing we have to keep in mind is whenever we boost frequencies, we're actually changing the volume of the track. And so a lot of the times we will have to do a gain adjustment here. For example, I added 3.4 dB at this frequency, 1 there, 1.7 there. Now, it's not really an exact science to add it up and then reduce the volume of your track here. But you're going to want to use your ear to understand, okay, it was about this volume before, I've added this much frequency, and now I'm going to reduce it to get the volume to be the same. Because a lot of times we're boosting frequencies, and all it's doing is changing the volume of the track, and we think it sounds better. Really, you just turn it up. You just need to turn up the track before to get it to work properly. So those are frequencies I liked to boost. Now I'm going to find one that doesn't sound great to my ears and remove it from the mix. There's no saying what this world can bring. And every time I close my eyes. So to me, that was very low mid. It was muffling the sound quite a bit of the snare drum. So I took that out of the mix here. We could do the same thing with the parametric EQ I was just showing you on the graphical EQ. So that's an example with a snare drum. What about a different instrument? Okay, let's come down here. I have a guitar solo in this part of the song. I'm going to solo it real quick here for you so you can hear it. Now let's think about a guitar solo for a second. Does a guitar solo absolutely need all this low end, right? When you think about a guitar solo that you've heard in songs before, do they have tons of body and bottom, or they have more top end? To me, it appears that, or when I listen to it, that a guitar solo is going to have more top end. And so I want to remove some of the bottom and add top again. See how that frequency sounds terrible? And now you don't want to do this too much. But for me, I just heard that frequency. I went and found it, and I wanted to remove it. That's a lot of low mids we don't need. Now let's get this thing to be more present. To me, that's a lot more present there. What I'm actually going to do is use the low pass filter. Why? There were a lot of scratchy, super high frequencies in that guitar solo that I didn't like the sound of. It may actually pierce the listener's ears. So I'm going to roll off down to about 10K there. To me, that guitar solo sounds a lot more present. We can do it with our synth track here. Listen to these synths in the song. Again, these synths do not need to be super low end heavy, and I would do a similar thing here. Now, I've done some things where I've high passed, I've taken out some low mids and added some top. That is not the rule of thumb for every track, okay? Like if I were to mix this bass guitar or show you the EQ I have going on this bass guitar, I actually added bottom, right? So I've added some bottom here. I've added 4.07 dB of 100 hertz, right? So the point is to use your ears and listen to the track. But here's the things to keep in mind with EQ, okay? There's graphical and there's parametric. You want to utilize your high pass filter, boost frequencies that enhance the sound and make it more clear in the mix while removing frequencies that are distracting or muffling the instrument too much so that it doesn't poke through. And then remember to gain match your sound. So turn the sound down if you've added a lot of boost to the instrument to get it to level match to the rest of the track. So that's my basic overview of equalization. If you have any questions, please leave it in a comment. I'd love to start a discussion about how you can improve your mixes with EQ. This is one of the most basic functions. EQ comes in all forms, but really it is one of the building blocks to making your mixes and your tracks sound great because it gives you a ton of control. Just like that car stereo where you can boost the lows or the highs, you just have it on every track and it gives you the power to give your tracks more clarity and cut through the mix. So anyways, those are my tips and I'll see you guys next time.